What if self-pleasure wasn't something to hide, but something to master? My guest today teaches men how to turn masturbation into mindfulness, and it might change how you see yourself. Kevin Anthony is a certified sexologist, tantra counselor, NLP practitioner, and a sex, love, and relationship coach. He's also the host of the Love Lab podcast, creator of the popular YouTube channel Kevin Anthony Coaching, and creator of the popular online course series Power and Mastery, as well as many other great courses. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a great topic. So let's start with, as a woman, clearly we have different masturbation practices. Why is a masturbation practice particularly important to men?
Ooh, that is a really great question. Very rarely does somebody ask why it's important to men. Well, there are actually a couple of good reasons for that. Number one, I think, is because, how you masturbate trains your body for how you show up in the bedroom, right? A lot of times people tend to view the masturbation practice simply as, well, it's something I do for pleasure. It's something I do to relieve the pressure I feel or to move my sexual energy or whatever it is. But it can also be used specifically for training your body to become an excellent lover or a master lover, as I like to call it. So that's one potential reason. Another reason is this, and this is true for both men and women when it comes to masturbation, which is that if you have a masturbation practice and you're really tuning into your body, you get to know what works for you. You get to figure out what works for your body, how you like to be touched, what type of different acts or things feel good to you. And so it really helps you get in touch with your own body. And that's something that, I guess maybe if we're speaking to women, it's a little bit more appropriate in a sense that, a lot of women were shamed for that. And so they don't have that sort of, intimate connection with their body. Whereas, men, it's a bit more accepted and we tend to not have as much shame around it, although there is still a significant amount of shame around it. But anyway, the point simply being is that another reason that you would want to have a practice is because it really does help you get in touch with your own body and your own sexuality and figure out what you like and what you want. So, there can be a lot of reasons for having a masturbation practice. There's a lot of people today, the younger generations are having a lot less sex than the older generations, and many of them are starting much, much later. And so does that mean that we just have to not have any sexual, energy moving, any connection to our sexuality? I don't think the answer to that is yes. I think that even if we don't have a partner, we can still have a connection to our sexuality. We can still move our sexual energy. And one of the ways that we can do that is through having a masturbation practice.
What are some of the things that men do, quote, wrong with their masturbation practice?
All right, now we're getting into the nitty gritty right here. Because honestly, the majority of men masturbate incorrectly. And some of you may be listening and going, how in the world can you masturbate incorrectly? Like, as long as you're not hurting yourself, what could possibly be incorrect about it? Well, there actually are a few things. Now, if you never intend on having a partner at all, and you just want to relieve some pressure because you're feeling super horny, okay, you can pretty much do whatever you want. However, like I said earlier, how you masturbate is also how you're training your body to show up in the bedroom with a partner. So some of the things that men do wrong. Firstly, they go way too fast. Most men will, 0 to, 100 miles an hour, and they ejaculate in, less than 3 minutes for most men. If we look at the stats, there have been several studies done over the years on how long men last with penetration, right? So when they're having sex, how long it takes before they ejaculate. And the average is 5 to 7 minutes. That is an extremely short period of time. And when you contrast that with women who take 25 to 30 minutes to achieve orgasm, you can see that there's a big disparity. And this is what we all refer to as the orgasm gap, right? So it is in your best interest as a man to learn how to last longer. But as they say, this is true in sports and it's true in the bedroom too. How you train is how you show up in the game, right? So if you wanted to run a marathon and you only ever ran 5 miles at a time, What's going to happen when you show up to run a full marathon? You're not going to be able to do it. And it's the exact same thing here with masturbation. When you go too fast, when you focus on the destination, which is I'm just going to have an orgasm and ejaculate as quickly as I can, you are setting yourself up for failure. So that's the first thing. The second thing that men often do wrong with masturbation is they always use porn. And that is a problem for numerous reasons. Number one, if we relate it to the first thing that I talked about, the number one problem is that how do most men use porn to masturbate? Well, they spend about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes looking for the clip that is going to be the one that is, oh, this is the one for today, right? And then once they turn it on, in less than 5 minutes, boom, there they go. They ejaculate and they're off to, go watch the game or do something else, right? The porn is hyper-stimulating. And so one, it gets them off really quick, which is partly why they're doing it. But again, training their body to ejaculate too quickly. But here's the other problem with using porn to masturbate, is that porn is not reality. Everything in porn is exaggerated. The boobs are bigger. The screams are louder. She seems to love everything regardless of how ridiculous it is, right? She's orgasming nonstop all the time from everything.
No warm up.
Yeah, right, exactly, with no warm up whatsoever. and the reality is real life isn't like that. And so when men use porn to masturbate frequently, they kind of get desensitized to reality. So now here they are with a real woman. She doesn't look like the woman in the porn. She doesn't act like the woman in the porn. She's not wanting to do the things the women in the porn do. She's not exploding into orgasms constantly, right? Like all the things. And so therefore they actually start to have erection difficulties, right? Because they're not as turned on by reality as they are by the porn. They can even have problems ejaculating where they literally just aren't turned on enough to actually ejaculate. So by masturbating constantly with porn, you are really, again, setting yourself up for failure in the bedroom. Now, again, if you never plan on having a partner and you just want to be by yourself, in your bedroom with your porn, okay. This is not necessarily going to hurt yourself, probably. But if you really want to translate the self-pleasure skills into skills in the bedroom with a partner, those are the two biggest mistakes that men make. They go way too fast and they use porn.
What about some of the experiences I have had, and I'm a little older, and so some of these might be physical issues, but I have found that men are having trouble not just keeping an erection, which there's a lot of ways to help that, but actually ejaculating. It's the opposite problem. Rather than going quickly, they are taking a really long time or not able to ejaculate at all.
Yeah, that can happen as we get older. There are some physical things that happen that can create that. But that actually also is another side effect of a lot of porn use, this anorgasmia, this just inability to actually have an orgasm. So when I encounter that with men, one of the things we do is we have to basically get them off the porn. We have to resensitize them, because that's what happens is they get desensitized, right? And then now almost no amount of stimulation is going to get them there, right? Because they're using it because they want pleasure, and eventually it takes them to a place where they're not actually experiencing pleasure anymore.
What about the idea of the death grip?
Yes, the death grip. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up. It's not one actually that I talk about that much, but it is actually a real thing. This idea of the death grip. Yeah, which is that a lot of men, you're right, a lot of men masturbate too hard. That is another thing that happens. They're just, they grip too hard, they pull too hard, they go too fast. They are just really going too hard. And, part of that, again, is the desensitization, which can happen from the porn. But part of it, I think, also is with some men that they're not actually in touch with their own bodies, right? And so they're desensitized still, but for a different reason, right? Which is, and it could be trauma, could be all kinds of different things that are underneath the surface, but they literally don't really feel. And so to feel something, they have to go way over the top, right? With death grip and, too fast and, all that kind of stuff. And obviously, that's going to create further desensitization. But I also have heard real stories from men, personal clients that I have coached, who have literally injured themselves from masturbating too hard. But it does happen. And I have heard from men who have said, here's where I was at and here's what I did. And they've talked about you can actually break your penis.
Right.
And they have. Now, it can heal, but it doesn't always heal straight anymore. Once you've damaged the structures in the inside of the penis, they don't always heal and give you a normal penis back. So it is definitely something you want to be careful of.
Before I get to the tips, what do you say to this practice of holding back ejaculating or orgasming for men that I've heard about?
Edging is generally what it's referred to, which is there's not ejaculating at all.
Right.
So there's that. And then there's the practice of edging, which is one of the things that, I incorporate into what I teach when you want to last longer. So let's talk about this idea first of just not ejaculating at all. I think that is perfectly fine, but you don't have to 100% stop. So if we think about Tantra, and you mentioned in the intro that, I'm a Tantra counselor as well. Tantra views sexuality as a lot more than just we put a penis in a vagina and we, move it in and out for 5 to 7 minutes, right? Like Tantra views sexuality as so much more than that. And as far as Tantra is concerned, it has a lot to do with moving the sexual energy, not only through your body, but also through your partner's body, right? And so Tantra doesn't see ejaculation as an end goal, which means you could have an entire masturbation practice. You could move tons of energy through your body. You could actually feel satiated at the end of it and not ejaculate. Now, according to the Taoists actually have a whole chart for how frequently you should ejaculate based on your age. Because from the Taoist point of view, the more frequently you ejaculate, the more energy you lose, right? Because ejaculation is this big explosion of energy outward. And so they look at energy as your life force. And the more frequently you're just, exploding your life force out, the more it can have repercussions on your entire body, your health and everything. So from their point of view, they would say, well, based on your age, you should only ejaculate, X times per week. But that doesn't mean that you can't masturbate. So what they would say is masturbate all you want, but cultivate that energy, learn how to move that energy through your body, and then learn how to use that energy for other things as well. I mean, if you did an hour-long masturbation practice and you built up a ton of sexual energy, and when you were done, you felt complete, but still highly energized, what could you then go accomplish outside of masturbation with that energy? Well, the sky's the limit. You could do anything with that, right? And so that's really the way they see it. So, the idea of having to ejaculate every time you masturbate just isn't really in their reality. And I can honestly say, as somebody who does this myself, I do not ejaculate that frequently, whether it's through masturbation or lovemaking. I choose when I want to and when I don't want to. And I would say, if I had to guess, it'd probably be one every 4 or 5 times. This is true with lovemaking as well. I don't ejaculate every time I make love with my woman. And there just isn't really a need to. That's kind of the idea of, do you have to ejaculate every time you masturbate? No. And if you have control over your ejaculation, if you've mastered that, then you just get to choose. I can say today I want to, today I don't want to.
So are you talking about orgasming without ejaculating, or not even necessarily orgasming because the experience in and of itself is good enough that you don't feel that need to have the orgasm?
Great question, because we haven't gotten there yet to separating orgasm from ejaculation. Either way is perfectly fine. Sometimes I will masturbate and I don't actually have an orgasm. I just enjoy the feeling of it and moving that energy. And I'm like, oh, that was great. And then I just move on and go do something else. Other times I will do a longer practice. And because I do know how to separate orgasm and ejaculation, I'll go through multiple waves of orgasms. And then I generally feel basically the same at the end of that as I would if I had actually ejaculated. I'm like totally satiated now and I'm good, right? So it can really be either one. One thing that most men are not aware of is that you can actually separate them. They are two distinct things. And medically, we understand this, right? But they tend to happen at the same time, unless we've learned to do otherwise. And so everybody just thinks they're the same thing. It's like, oh, I had an orgasm. And what they really mean to say is, oh, I ejaculated, right? But you can absolutely separate them. The idea that you can be a multi-orgasmic man, as Montauk Chia calls it, is absolutely real and true. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that it's possible, and it's awesome.
So explain the physiology of that, if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll get into some tips into how to be a better masturbator and enjoy your energy better.
There's a couple of things that happen during orgasm/ejaculation, right? So you have this big movement of energy, right? This big release of energy that happens. You also have rhythmic contractions of the muscles, right? So that's typically what the sensation that people are used to feeling is, that rhythmic contraction of the muscles. And then you also have the release of semen. But those things can be controlled sort of independently, right? So when we're talking about having what we call a non-ejaculatory orgasm, you get those rhythmic contractions of the muscles, you get that big movement of the sexual energy, but what you don't have is the release of semen. So you can learn to control that. So you're basically taking that part, that last part, which is the release of semen, out of the equation, but you're still experiencing the rest of the sensations that you would normally have. Now, I will say this, that generally speaking, especially the first, round or two or three, it doesn't feel quite as intense generally as when you also ejaculate, but it can once you've built up enough energy. You can have really intense non-ejaculatory orgasms, but they take a little bit more time generally to build to get to that point. Whereas if you allow yourself to ejaculate, you can do that in 2.5 minutes and it feels super intense, right? Because ejaculating semen, adds to that and gives it more of that intensity. But you can get that without the ejaculation. It just takes a little bit more time to build up. It actually ends up being a little bit more similar to female orgasm in that respect, right? Where for women, the orgasms tend to build. The more of them you have, they tend to get a little bit more intense, a little bit more intense. That's often how it tends to be for men with non-ejaculatory orgasms as well.
So I would imagine a lot of men are saying like, wow, this is just way too much work. Like, I'm just going to, as you would say, rub it out and be done with it. But say for the gentlemen who feel that way, I would posture that we want you to be better lovers so that we as female partners could really enjoy it. So should a man be so inclined to actually be willing to put in the work to become a better masturbator, what would be the way that you would recommend, or what are some tips you can give him?
Yeah, the first thing, of course, is like you said, you should want to do this because you will become a better lover. And trust me, your woman wants you to become a better lover. Even if she's not saying it, trust me, she wants it. If you are anywhere near the average, not only does she want it, she needs it. She needs you to step up and be a better lover. But also keep in mind that doing this, if you can extend your practice out, instead of, 5 minutes of masturbation and you did 20 minutes, you just got 15 more minutes of pleasure. You just enjoyed something that feels good for longer, right? So you have that motivation as well. You get to experience more. So, how do we get there? Number one is you just have to realize it's possible. And a lot of men don't realize it's possible because they've never done it before. And they haven't listened to a ton of shows like this where they've heard this before, right? So number one, realize that it's possible. Number two, you have to find your motivation, whether your motivation is for your own pleasure or your motivation is to become a better lover, or both, right? So now I know it's possible. Now I'm motivated to do it. Now I have to change habits. And this is where it's actually the most difficult, because you have to get out of those old habits that you've been doing probably since you were a young boy, right? You've got to slow down, right? You've got to stop racing towards the destination of ejaculation. You've got to make it actually a whole experience. Like, I'm here to experience pleasure. I'm here to create sexual energy. I'm not just here to, hit the pressure release valve, right? Now, sometimes that's okay. We're not saying you can't ever do that. If you've just been really, really horny and you've had no outlet and you just want to hit that pressure release valve, great. But don't make that the way that you masturbate all the time, right? A couple other things that men would need to know. It's really important to understand the arousal scale. And I'm sure as a sex educator, you're familiar with this too, because lots of sex educators teach the arousal scale. And it's just a simple scale from 1 to 10, where it basically charts how aroused you are, from I'm not aroused at all to, I think maybe I'm interested in sex, to, yeah, I want sex now, I'm doing sex, to I have orgasm/ejaculated. And why that's important is because, a lot of times men go, oops, I ejaculated, sorry. There should never be any such thing as oops, because you should always know where you're at on that arousal scale. And if you know where you're at, there is no oops, it just happened. Because when you start to get close, if you don't want to ejaculate, you just slow down. You just back it off a little bit, right? So that's an essential part to learning how to master this practice. You have to be in touch with your body. You have to know where you're at on that arousal scale. And then, of course, you have to change your masturbation habits, right? You have to think of it more as a journey. You have to allow yourself to go through multiple waves of sexual energy. In that, this is where I teach what I call the mindful masturbation practice, which brings all of these elements together and teaches you how to go through these waves of sexual energy, where you build it up to almost ejaculating, but then you bring it back down again. And then you build it up again. And if you do that enough times, eventually what will happen is you'll get close to ejaculating, but you will have an orgasm. And the first time you experience that as a man, it's like the skies opened up and the sun's beaming in. And it's like, I did it. I actually did it. I have coached a lot of men through this process. And in the beginning, they always struggle with it. They get close. They don't have the orgasm, but they get close and they feel like it's almost coming. And then eventually they ejaculate. They keep at it. And when it first happens for them, and they come back to that next session and give me feedback, they're like, oh my God, I finally did it. It's hard for a lot of men to truly believe it's possible until they actually experience it.
If a man ejaculates, does he necessarily have an orgasm? Like, can he ejaculate without orgasming? Is it even possible?
It is possible, but it's pretty rare. I have done this before, not on purpose. It has happened in extreme situations where I've been making love for hours and hours and moved tons of energy. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that was weird. It's not as explosive. It's not as much volume. It tends to be mostly what we would call prosthetic fluid, right? So our semen is made up of fluid that's created in the prostate, which is all the lubrication, and then the actual sperm, which are made in the testes, and they combine together before they come out. Mostly what's coming out in that way is just all that lubrication prosthetic fluid. It's not actual semen. You can't assume that that's 100% true. So don't think you're not going to get her pregnant if that happens. You have to assume there could be, and possibly is. In general, you'll notice that it tends to be a lot less volume and it tends to be a lot more clear because it's mostly the fluid coming from the prostate.
Okay, I'm just brought to mind a couple of things. What about, so I'm single and protection is a really important thing. And a lot of times guys will say, well, I just can't because there's a condom involved. Is this practice something that could help a man enjoy the sensation of masturbation or the feeling with a condom on in a penetrative situation, to enjoy the whole experience better, even though the physical sensation might have a barrier to it?
Yeah, well, any man that says he just can't ejaculate because, you're using a condom, there's generally one of two things going on in that situation. Either he's straight up lying because he just wants to feel you without a condom, which is probably the majority of the cases. But there are some legit ones as well. And generally what's happening in those cases is that they're really just not that in touch with their own bodies and their own sensations, right? So they're numbed out for whatever reason, and they're looking for any extra bit of sensation that they can get. Some of the reasons why you would want to have a masturbation practice, and one of those was to get more in touch with your body, right? So if you're really doing this practice and you're doing it in the mindful masturbation way, and you're cutting out the porn use and all of that, you will start to resensitize your body. You will start to get more in touch with your body. You'll feel more, right? And when that happens, it won't matter anymore if there's a condom involved or not.
Great. Good answer. What do you think? I've seen now a lot of these masturbation tools, newer types of tools, but what do you think of those in terms of, are they a help or a hindrance to a masturbation practice or in general?
Either or, really, it just depends how you use them. So they can have value. One of the things that I definitely notice, having trained a lot of men in this, is that in the beginning, they all struggle with the mindful masturbation practice and separating orgasm from ejaculation and being able to last longer. And eventually they start to get it. They start to be able to last longer. They start to build confidence, right? Then they go have sex with a woman, and some of the progress they made went out the window. And they come back kind of disappointed. They're like, but I was doing so well. It's like, yes, but you're mastering it on your own. Now there's a whole other person, right? There's a whole other level of stimulation. There's a whole other level of energy coming at you, right? So now it's time to step up to the next level and learn how to manage that. Well, one of the things that I think some of these new tools can do is a better job at recreating what it's actually like to do penetration, right? So you can obviously make it feel very good by using your hand, right? You can use lube to make it feel like a lubricated vagina. But some of these tools do a pretty decent job of mimicking what it feels like to have your penis inside a woman's vagina. And so from that aspect, if you're using it in conjunction with something like the mindful masturbation practice, it can help you learn to last longer because it does a pretty good job of recreating that same sensation that you would feel. Now, obviously, it's an inanimate object. So the idea that, you're not going to be feeling her energy with it, it is at least helping you get a little bit closer to that sensation and feeling. So from that perspective, they can be great. However, there is, of course, a bit of a warning with them, which is they can also be overstimulating, right? So, I've had a couple of these tools as sponsors of mine, and I always make sure that I say, if used appropriately. Because they're sponsors, they have sent me these and I've tried them, and they can be pretty amazing in some respects. And at the same time, like if you're not careful how you use them, they can basically, all the stuff we talked about training yourself to come too fast, they can do that, but times 10, right? Because they can be that intense. So really it has to do with how do you use it? What is your intention for this device, right? If your intention is to use it in conjunction with a practice that helps you become a better lover, if your intention is to use it in a way that simply adds more pleasure but doesn't get you off super fast, then great, they can be fine. And just be careful because you could end up training yourself. It's like women with vibrators, right? Women overuse vibrators a lot and they keep getting stronger and stronger. And then they wonder why they can't come any other way.
Well, I would argue with that, but that's another conversation. What's the role of a penis pump? I was recently introduced to those. I hadn't seen any before. I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know what it was. And now I've seen two different ones. I'm just curious. Is there a role for it in this context?
The only role for penis pumps in the context of a masturbation practice is really if you are having difficulty achieving an erection. So there's basically two main uses for penis pumps. One is to help you achieve an erection. The other is to increase size. We have to be really careful with this, though. And I know people will disagree with me on this. I have these conversations all the time, and there's tons of people. I get emails from them. They tell me, no way, this is what blah, blah, blah. Okay. In my personal opinion, penis pumps, or vacuum erection devices as they're also called, will help you make the most out of what you have, right? Because basically all it's doing is using suction to pull blood into the penis, and it can help stretch out the tissue. And as the tissue stretches a little bit, it can accommodate a little bit more blood, and it can grow in size a bit. But if you think you have, the average length for a male penis is 5 inches. If you think you're going to end up being 7 inches or 8 inches as a result of using these, I hate to break it to you, it's not going to happen, right? Like, you can only stretch the tissue so far. And if you stretch too far, you're actually going to do damage and hurt yourself. Let's say you've had a long period of not masturbating or not having sex or anything like that. You can get atrophy, right? So, and this is something actually that happens for men as we get older. So one of the functions of nocturnal erections is to keep that stretched out, to keep healthy blood flow going through, to basically keep your penis working the way that it's supposed to. But as we get older, testosterone levels go down, our health may not be as good, especially our circulatory system health. We can have less frequent nocturnal erections. So one of the ways that you can still get the benefits of what that natural mechanism would be doing for you is to periodically use a penis pump. So it does the same thing. It's engorging the penis with blood. It's stretching everything out. It's helping keeping things working as they should. So as I mentioned with penis pumps, if you're struggling with achieving an erection, it can obviously help you achieve an erection without the use of any drugs or other surgeries or things like that, in a way that's safe, where you're not going to hurt yourself. And then, once you have an erection, you can have sex or you can masturbate.
And what about using Viagra? Does it achieve the same result?
Yeah, it's basically the same result. In some circumstances, those medications are indicated. I'm not a huge fan of it personally. What I would prefer is that people get healthy, that they actually fix their body and not rely on those types of things. There's generally two things that get in the way. There's the physical health of your body, and then there's what I would basically call your mental health, like all the stuff in your mind that gets in the way. And both of those can be fixed for the most part, right? So why take the easy way out and rely on a pill? And honestly, the pills don't work for everybody. The results of how they work vary. I've had people tell me it worked for a while, it stopped working, right? And then there's the whole idea of, I got to plan ahead. Not only do I have to have it, but I got to take it ahead of time. So there's, it's not the best way to manage things, in my opinion. If it's necessary, if nothing else is going to work for you, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would say, do the work, get your body healthy, get your mind healthy, right? If you need some help in the interim, a vacuum erection device or a penis pump could potentially be the thing that helps you. It can help you achieve an erection. Generally, you would put on a cock ring after that to keep the blood there. And in my opinion, a much safer way to go about it.
Anything else you want to add with regard to masturbation before I give you my final 3 questions?
I would just say that most men look at masturbation from the wrong mindset. And I would really love to see men shift that mindset. And that is, go away from the mindset of, I'm just hitting the pressure release valve and I want to get it over quickly, and shift to the mindset of, this is a practice. Women do this easily. They can turn their masturbation into a whole practice. They will go and light candles and run a bath and do a whole self-pleasure routine. Men just don't do that. Now, man, I'm not saying you got to light candles and you got to run a bath.
But there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there is nothing wrong with that. So do that if you want. But I'm just saying, just turn it more into a practice. Take your time, slow down, and just make it something that is longer, more enjoyable, and that also is training your body to be good in the bedroom.
Great. I love it. I love it. Great advice. All right. Question 1. What is your definition of sex?
My definition of sex? Nobody's ever asked me for a specific definition of sex. I would say, from a tantric perspective, it's any time the two of us are moving sexual energy together, right? And then, from a more, let's say, a less tantric perspective, I would say that it's any time that there's any sort of sexual activity. So, of course, we all remember good old Bill, I did not have sex with that woman because he was trying to tell everybody that receiving a blowjob wasn't sex. I would consider receiving a blowjob sex. It is a sexual act. I would say that anytime that we are moving sexual energy together, or we are engaged in any sort of sexual act, even if that's just touching with our hands or using our mouths for oral sex or anything like that, I think that would be considered sex.
Best orgasm you ever had? And it could be one of the best orgasms you've ever had, because I would imagine as a tantric practicer that you've had quite a few.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as the best orgasm, like you were saying, but, I would say that maybe the best multi-orgasmic experience I've had was early on when I first met my wife. I think it was about 5 hours of sex that we had. We did have to pause in the middle to eat something because you move that much energy and move physically that much, and you're going to need some refreshments. But yeah, it was just hours and hours of just waves and waves of amazing orgasmic bliss on both of our ends. And the only reason why we stopped actually was because at some point I became aware of what time it was, and I was like, I got to go to work.
And then you shifted what you do for work to working in the sex field.
Right.
It's much more fun.
Definitely.
Last question, fantasy that you have that you haven't experienced yet.
Oh, well, that's a really tough one. Oh, man. That I haven't experienced yet. I'm going to have to dig deep for that one. I am fortunate in the fact that, having been around the poly community for many years, having been around the tantra community for many years, having been to more sex parties than I could count, literally, over many, many years, tantra festivals, all of the swingers events even, all of that stuff. I'm fortunate enough to say that I've pretty much experienced everything I've wanted to thus far, which, is not the case for most people.
Right.
This is why I often tell people, when you're young, go out and have experiences when you're young, right? That's the time to play around and see what you like and what you don't like. So that's just why it's such a hard question for me to answer. What would I want to experience that I haven't experienced yet? All right. I think I've always wanted to go down. I've had some friends who've been to some places down in Mexico where basically your bedroom is on the beach, open air. And they just have this big 4-post bed, literally right on the beach. And I would love to be there with my lover and just spend an entire weekend just making love in that environment. I think that would be amazing. I've always wanted to do that. That's something hasn't actually happened yet.
I love it. I have to say that's one of mine too. So I got to find the right partner for it, but sex on the beach is definitely a highlight. Kevin, this was great. Thank you so much. I will leave links to both your course and your contact information in the show notes. And hopefully we'll do this again on another subject sometime soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a ton of fun.